Just sign it, Mom. It's what families do. Emily's voice was soft, almost gentle, the way she used to speak when she was a little girl asking for one more bedtime story. But there was something else underneath it now, something polished and practiced, something that didn't belong to the daughter I had raised. I held the pen in my hand and looked down at the paper spread neatly across the polished oak desk in the lawyer's office, the words printed in clean black ink that seemed too calm for what they were asking of me. For a moment, I didn't move. Not because I didn't understand, but because I understood too well. I placed the tip of the pen just above the signature line, close enough to feel the weight of the decision, close enough that anyone watching would think it was already done, and then I stopped. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted the pen and set it back down on the desk. That was the moment I realized something I had been refusing to see for weeks. I was no longer her mother in that room. I was just a signature. The air felt too still, like even the walls were waiting for me to comply, and I could feel Emily watching me, her gaze steady, patient, confident in a way that made my chest tighten. She thought this was a formality. She thought this was already over. I turned my head slightly and met her eyes, and for just a second, I searched for something familiar there, something soft, something that remembered who we used to be to each other. All I saw was expectation. "It's standard, Mom," she added, her tone light, almost reassuring, as if she were explaining something simple, like how to set up a new phone or sign an online form. "Everyone does it. It just makes things easier for the family. Easier for the family." I repeated the words silently, letting them settle, letting them echo against everything I had lived through to build that word into something sacred. Family. I had spent decades believing in that word, shaping my life around it, sacrificing quietly for it, trusting it without question. And now it was being used like a tool, something convenient, something that could be held up as a reason for me to give away what little I had left. My fingers rested lightly on the desk, and I noticed how steady they were. I expected them to tremble, expected grief or anger to rise up and make this moment messy, emotional, undeniable. But there was nothing like that. Just a calm, cold clarity that settled deeper with every passing second. I glanced back at the document, at the careful language that tried so hard to sound harmless, supportive, temporary. Words that wrapped themselves around the truth without ever touching it. I didn't need to read it again. I already knew what it meant. I could feel Emily leaning slightly closer, not enough to be obvious, just enough to close the distance, to guide the outcome without appearing to force it. She had always been good at that. Even as a child, she knew how to wait, how to let things unfold in her favor without raising her voice. I used to admire that about her. I used to think it meant she was strong. Now I understood it meant something else entirely. I let out a slow breath, barely noticeable, and straightened my posture in the chair. Across the desk, the lawyer shifted slightly, his hands folded, his expression neutral in the way professionals learn to be when they know more than they are saying. No one spoke. No one needed to. The silence itself had become part of the pressure, part of the expectation that I would do what was being asked because that was what I had always done. I took one last look at the line where my name was supposed to go, at the space that had already been decided for me, and then I leaned back just enough to break the illusion that I was about to sign. "No," I said quietly, the words simple, steady, and completely unfamiliar in my own voice, as if I were hearing it for the first time. I did not argue with her after that. I did not raise my voice, did not explain, did not try to make her understand what that word meant to me, because something inside me had already shifted, something quiet and irreversible, like a door closing without a sound. The lawyer cleared his throat softly, the kind of polite interruption meant to smooth over discomfort, but it only made the silence feel heavier, more deliberate. Emily blinked once, as if she had misheard me, as if the word no did not quite register in a world where I had always said yes. "Mom," she said again, this time a little firmer, the softness thinning at the edges, "I think you are overthinking this. It is just paperwork. Just paperwork." I let my gaze drift back to the document, not to read it, but to look at it the way you look at something that has already revealed its true shape. The clean lines, the careful wording, the way it tried so hard to feel harmless. I wondered how long she had been planning this, how many conversations had taken place without me, how many times my name had been spoken in rooms I was never invited into. I thought about the past 3 weeks, about how often she had come by the house, bringing groceries I did not ask for, insisting on organizing things that did not need organizing, opening drawers and cabinets with a familiarity that felt different now, less like care and more like inventory. At the time, I told myself she was grieving in her own way, that people show love differently, that I should be grateful she was there at all. Now, sitting in that office, I saw it clearly for what it was. Preparation. I folded my hands loosely in my lap and leaned back slightly in the chair, creating a small distance between myself and the desk, between myself and the expectation that I would comply. I am not overthinking anything, I said, my voice calm, almost gentle, the same tone I used to use when Emily was a child and needed reassurance. The difference was, this time I was not reassuring her. I was steadying myself. She let out a small breath, the kind that carried impatience just beneath the surface, and glanced briefly at the lawyer as if hoping he would step in, as if authority might persuade me where she could not. He did not. He simply adjusted his posture, his expression carefully neutral, but there was something in his eyes now, something more attentive, as if he had begun to understand that this was not going to follow the script he had expected. We talked about this, Emily continued, her voice tightening just enough to reveal the effort it took to keep it controlled. You said you trusted me. I did not answer right away. I let the words settle, not because they carried weight, but because they deserved to be seen for what they were. Trust. Another word that had once meant something solid, something unbreakable. I lifted my eyes to meet hers again, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something unfamiliar in her expression. Not guilt. Not exactly. Something closer to uncertainty, quickly hidden, quickly replaced by that same practiced composure. I did, I said quietly. Past tense. I did not need to say anything more. The room seemed to absorb that distinction, the shift from what had been to what no longer was. Outside the window, I could see the faint outline of the parking lot. Cars lined up in neat rows under the late afternoon light, everything orderly, predictable, untouched by what was unfolding inside. I wondered how many decisions like this had been made in rooms just like this, how many signatures had been given without hesitation, without question, simply because it was easier to believe in the version of family that had been presented. I reached forward then, not for the pen, but for the edge of the document, and gently turned it toward myself, as if claiming the right to look at it on my own terms. I did not sign. Not yet. Not ever, if I had anything to say about it. And for the first time since my husband had passed, I felt something other than grief settle into my chest. It was not anger. It was not even sadness. It was clarity. I did not rush to speak after that. I let the silence stretch just a little longer, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to feel it fully, to understand what had just shifted between us. Emily was no longer looking at me the way a daughter looks at her mother. There was no softness left, no patience, only a quiet calculation that flickered behind her eyes like something she could not quite hide anymore. It was subtle, almost invisible if you were not paying attention, but I had spent a lifetime paying attention to her. I noticed the way her fingers tapped once against the edge of the desk before she stopped herself, the way her shoulders tightened just slightly, as if she were holding back something sharper. Mom, she said again, this time dropping the gentle tone altogether, replacing it with something more direct, more controlled. This is not complicated. The house is too much for you to manage on your own. This just puts everything in order. I listened to her words carefully, not because I believed them, but because I wanted to hear how they were being shaped. Not once did she say the word transfer. Not once did she say ownership. Everything was softened, adjusted, wrapped in concern that sounded reasonable on the surface. That was always the way with things like this. The truth was never loud. It was quiet, careful, almost polite. I lowered my eyes to the document again, and this time I let them move slowly across the lines, not skimming, not assuming, but reading every word the way my husband used to insist we do when it came to anything important. I could almost hear his voice in the back of my mind, steady and calm, telling me to take my time, to never let anyone rush me into a decision that could not be undone. He had always been patient like that. He used to say that people reveal themselves most clearly when they think you are not looking closely. I understood what he meant now in a way I never had before. As I read, the language became clearer, sharper, impossible to ignore. This was not about helping me. It was not about simplifying anything. It was a complete transfer of control, immediate and irreversible, dressed up in careful phrasing that relied on trust to do the rest. I felt something settle deeper inside me. Not anger, not shock, but recognition. This had not started today. This had been building, quietly, step by step, each small action leading to this moment. The extra visits. The questions about bank statements. The way Emily had started finishing my sentences for me, correcting me gently when I spoke, as if she were already preparing to take over. I had noticed those things, but I had dismissed them, explained them away, told myself that I was imagining it. I was not imagining anything. I lifted my head and looked at her again, really looked this time, and what I saw was not the child I had raised, but a woman who had already decided the outcome and was simply waiting for me to catch up. You already signed your part, I said quietly, my voice even, not accusing, just stating what was obvious from the papers in front of me. She nodded once, quickly, as if that confirmed something important. Of course, she replied, a hint of relief slipping into her tone. We did everything properly. We just need your signature to finalize it. We. Not I. Not you and me. We. I let that word sit between us for a moment. Then I placed my hand flat against the document, not to claim it, but to anchor myself in the reality of what it was. Across the desk, the lawyer shifted again, this time more noticeably, and when I glanced at him, I saw something different in his expression now. Not just neutrality, but awareness. As if he, too, had begun to question the ease of this situation. I would like a copy of this, I said calmly, turning my attention back to him rather than to Emily. It was a small request, a reasonable one, but I felt the change in the room immediately. Emily's breath caught, just for a second, barely audible, but enough. Enough to tell me that this was not part of the plan she had expected. The request was simple, reasonable, something anyone in my position would have asked without hesitation, and yet it landed in the room like a disruption, like a stone dropped into still water. The lawyer nodded almost immediately, a reflex born from years of routine, but I noticed the brief glance he exchanged with Emily before he reached for the document. It was quick, subtle, the kind of look that would have gone unnoticed if I had not been watching so closely. Of course, he said, his tone professional, measured, but there was a slight pause before he moved. Just enough to tell me that something about this situation no longer felt as straightforward as it had a few minutes ago. Emily shifted in her seat, the movement small but restless, her composure adjusting itself in real time. Mom, you do not need to take it home, she said, her voice returning to that careful softness, but now it sounded thinner, stretched over something less certain. We can go through it together right now. It will only take a few minutes. I turned my head slowly and looked at her, not with anger, not with accusation, but with a kind of quiet attention that made it impossible for her to rush past what I had said. I would still like a copy, I repeated, just as calm, just as steady. I did not raise my voice. I did not justify the request. I simply held it there, unchanged. For a moment, she did not respond. Her lips pressed together briefly before she relaxed them again, and I saw it then, clearer than before, the crack in the certainty she had walked into this room with. It was small, but it was there. The lawyer cleared his throat again, this time with more purpose, and began gathering the pages, aligning them carefully before sliding one set aside. The sound of paper against wood seemed louder than it should have been, each movement deliberate, each second stretching just enough to make the shift undeniable. As he prepared the copy, my mind moved somewhere else, not away from the moment, but deeper into it, tracing back through the quiet warnings I had ignored. I thought about my husband again, about the way he used to sit at the kitchen table with his reading glasses low on his nose, reviewing documents line by line, never in a hurry, never assuming anything was exactly as it appeared. He used to tell me that clarity was not something you were given. It was something you claimed by refusing to be rushed. At the time, I would smile and tease him for being overly cautious, for taking too long over things that seemed simple. Now, sitting in that office, I understood that nothing important is ever simple. I rested my hands lightly on the desk and let that understanding settle into me fully, letting it replace the last traces of hesitation. Across from me, Emily leaned back slightly, crossing her arms in a gesture that looked casual at first glance, but carried a quiet defensiveness underneath. She was recalculating. I could see it in the way her eyes moved briefly from the document to the lawyer and then back to me, measuring, adjusting, trying to find a new way to guide this back to the outcome she wanted. "You trust me, right?" she said after a moment, the question coming out softer, almost reflective, but there was an edge to it now, something that pressed rather than reassured. I held her gaze and did not answer right away. I let the question sit between us, not because I needed time to think, but because I wanted her to hear the silence that followed it. Trust was no longer something that could be summoned with a question. It was something that had already been tested. Trust does not ask for urgency, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm, each word placed carefully, without emotion, without hesitation. The lawyer finished making the copy and slid it toward me across the desk, the paper stopping just within my reach. I looked down at it for a moment, then placed my hand on top of it, not to accept it blindly, but to acknowledge what it represented. Not an end, not a formality, but the beginning of something else entirely. And for the first time since I had walked into that office, I felt the balance shift, not dramatically, not loudly, but enough to know that this was no longer her moment. I did not open the copy right away. I let it rest beneath my hand for a moment, feeling the texture of the paper, the quiet weight of what it represented, as if grounding myself in something real before I allowed my eyes to move across it again. Emily watched me closely now, no longer pretending not to. The softness was gone completely. In its place was something sharper, more focused, like she was trying to anticipate my next move before I even made it. That used to be a game we played when she was little, guessing what the other person was thinking, laughing when we got it wrong. There was no laughter here, only calculation. I lifted the pages slowly and began to read, this time without distraction, without assumption, letting every sentence land exactly as it was written. The language was careful, almost elegant, the kind that hides intention behind structure, but once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Transfer of authority, immediate control, full discretion over property and financial decisions. I paused there, just long enough to let that phrase settle in my mind, repeating it silently until it lost any softness it might have carried. Full discretion, not shared, not temporary, complete. I turned the page, my movements unhurried, and continued. Maintenance of assets, reallocation of resources, protection of family interests. Each phrase built on the last, layering justification over intention until it almost sounded reasonable. Almost. I lowered the paper slightly and glanced at Emily again. She was watching my face now, searching for a reaction, something she could use, something that would tell her whether she still had control of the situation. I gave her nothing. Not confusion, not anger, just stillness. The kind that reveals nothing but sees everything. "It is all standard," she said quietly, as if filling the silence would somehow guide it back to where she wanted it to go. "We just want to make sure everything is taken care of." We. That word again. I let my eyes return to the document, but my thoughts moved beyond it now, tracing the pattern that had led here. The way she had started asking about account numbers, casually at first, as if it were just conversation. The way Daniel had begun mentioning property taxes during dinner, offering to help organize things. The way small decisions had slowly shifted away from me without me even noticing at the time. It had not happened all at once. It had been gradual, intentional, patient, just like this moment. I turned to the final page and saw the signature line again, my name printed neatly beneath it, waiting, expecting. I rested my thumb lightly against the edge of the paper and felt a faint, almost distant memory surface, something my husband had said years ago when we were signing the papers for the house. He had looked at me over the top of his glasses and said, "Never sign anything you would not be willing to explain out loud to yourself." At the time, it had seemed like a simple rule. Now it felt like a line drawn clearly between who I had been and who I was choosing to be. I lowered the document and placed it back on the desk, aligning it carefully with the edge, as if returning it to a place where it belonged, but not to me. "This gives you control of everything," I said, my voice even, not questioning, not accusing, just stating what was written plainly in front of all of us. Emily's jaw tightened just slightly before she relaxed it again. "It is just for convenience," she replied, quicker this time, the answer ready, practiced. "It makes things easier for everyone." I nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging the words themselves, rather than what they were meant to do. Easier. I understood now that ease had never been the goal. Control had been. I folded my hands together again, resting them calmly on the desk, and met her gaze with a clarity I had not felt before. "Then you will not mind if I take this home and review it with someone else?" I said. Not a question, a decision. Emily did not answer immediately this time. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. Her shoulders squared just slightly, her posture tightening as if she had stepped into a different version of herself, one that did not rely on warmth or persuasion. "Mom," she said slowly, choosing each word with more care than before. "There is no need to involve anyone else. This is already handled." Handled. I let the word settle, turning it over quietly in my mind. It sounded final, controlled, already decided. But I was beginning to understand something she had not accounted for. Nothing is handled until I say it is. I kept my expression unchanged, my tone even. "I prefer to have it reviewed," I replied, not adding anything more, not explaining, not negotiating. Just stating. Across the desk, the lawyer adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the document again, as if seeing it through a slightly different lens now. I noticed the way his fingers rested more cautiously on the edge of the paper, no longer moving with the same automatic confidence as before. Awareness had entered the room, and it was changing the rhythm of everything. Emily exhaled quietly, but this time the patience was gone. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," she said, her voice tightening just enough to reveal the pressure underneath. "We are trying to help you. You said yourself you do not want to deal with all of this alone." I listened carefully, not to the meaning of her words, but to the structure of them. Help. Harder. Alone. Each one placed carefully, designed to guide me back toward compliance, toward agreement. It might have worked once. It might have worked even a few weeks ago, when grief still blurred the edges of everything. But not now. Not here. I leaned back slightly in my chair, creating just a little more distance between myself and the desk, between myself and the version of events she was presenting. "Wanting help is not the same as giving everything away," I said quietly. The words landed without force, but they did not need it. Truth rarely does. For a moment, Emily said nothing. Her eyes flickered briefly toward the lawyer, then back to me, as if recalculating again, searching for a different approach, a different angle that might still lead her where she wanted to go. But the certainty she had walked in with was no longer there. I could see it now clearly. It had been replaced with something less stable, something that shifted every time I did not respond the way she expected. The lawyer cleared his throat once more, this time with a note of caution rather than routine. "It is completely reasonable for Mrs. Collins to seek independent review," he said carefully, his tone measured but firm enough to carry weight. "In fact, I would recommend it for any document of this nature." The room went still again, but this time the silence felt different. Not heavy with expectation, but open, uncertain, as if the direction of the moment had loosened its grip. Emily's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. The confidence was no longer clean. It was layered now, mixed with something else, something closer to frustration. "So that is it?" she asked, her voice quieter, but sharper. "You do not trust me?" I held her gaze, steady and clear, and for the first time since we sat down, I did not feel the need to search for the right words. They were already there. "I trust myself to read what I am signing," I said simply. And with that, something settled into place inside me, something solid and unmistakable, like a line that had finally been drawn and understood by everyone in the room. Emily's expression did not soften after that. If anything, it became more defined, more intentional, as if she had finally stopped pretending that this was still a conversation between a mother and a daughter and had accepted it for what it really was. A negotiation she expected to win. She leaned forward slightly, placing her hands flat against the desk, mirroring the position I had held earlier, but there was a difference in the way she did it. Mine had been steady. Hers carried urgency. "You are letting grief cloud your judgment," she said, her voice lower now, controlled. Each word placed carefully as if she had rehearsed it. "Dad would have wanted things to be simple. He would have trusted me to take care of you." I listened without interrupting, but something in those words settled wrong, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to feel out of place. My husband had never confused simplicity with surrender. He had never used trust as a shortcut to avoid understanding. I let that thought sit quietly, letting it grow clearer instead of reacting to it. Your father never rushed me into decisions, I said calmly, not raising my voice, not matching her tone, just placing the truth where it belonged. For a moment, she did not respond. The air between us tightened again, but this time it did not feel like pressure. It felt like exposure. Across the desk, the lawyer remained still, but I could sense his attention shifting, no longer passive, no longer neutral in the way it had been when we first sat down. He was listening now, really listening. Emily straightened slightly, her composure adjusting again, but it was no longer seamless. "We are wasting time," she said, a faint edge of frustration breaking through despite her effort to contain it. "This needs to be finalized. There are things that depend on it. Things. Not details. Not explanations. Just things." I noticed that. I noticed everything now. I reached for the copy of the document and folded it carefully, aligning the edges with deliberate precision, as if the act itself required attention, as if I had all the time in the world. In that moment, I did. Time was no longer something she controlled by creating urgency. It belonged to me again. "Then those things will have to wait," I replied, my voice steady, unhurried. The words did not push back. They simply refused to move. Emily let out a quiet breath, this time not even attempting to disguise the frustration behind it. Her fingers curled slightly against the surface of the desk before she relaxed them again, but the movement was enough. Enough to tell me that the balance had shifted more than she was willing to admit. "You are being difficult," she said, softer now, but no less pointed. I met her gaze without flinching, without searching for approval, without softening the moment. "No," I said quietly. "I am being careful." The distinction mattered. I could see it land, could see the way it unsettled the narrative she had been trying to build. Careful people do not sign blindly. Careful people ask questions. Careful people do not hand over control because it is presented as love. The lawyer shifted slightly in his chair, then leaned forward just enough to enter the space between us without taking sides. "Mrs. Collins is well within her rights to take time with this," he said, his voice even, professional, but now carrying a firmness that had not been there before. "There is no requirement for immediate execution." Immediate execution. Even the phrasing felt different now, heavier, more accurate than the softened language that had filled the room earlier. Emily turned her head toward him briefly, her expression tightening again, but she did not argue. Not directly. Instead, she looked back at me, her gaze sharper, more searching, as if trying to find the version of me that would still bend, still give in. She did not find it. I stood then, slowly, without rush, without hesitation, the movement quiet but final. The chair slid back, just enough to mark the shift from discussion to decision. I gathered the folded document in my hand, holding it lightly, not as something I owned, but as something I had chosen not to surrender to. "I will review this," I said, my voice calm, leaving no space for negotiation, no opening for persuasion. And as I turned toward the door, I did not look back immediately. I did not need to. I could already feel it. The moment she thought she had controlled had slipped, quietly, completely, out of her hands. I did not rush once I stepped outside the office. The hallway was quiet, lined with framed certificates and muted carpet that softened every footstep, but I could still feel the weight of what had just happened pressing lightly against my chest. Not heavy, not overwhelming, just present. I walked slowly, the folded document resting in my hand, my fingers steady around it, as if I had carried something like this before, as if I already knew what to do next. Behind me, I heard the faint sound of the office door opening, then closing again, followed by quicker footsteps that did not try to hide their urgency. "Mom," Emily called, her voice sharper now, stripped of the softness she had tried to maintain inside. I stopped, but I did not turn right away. I let the moment settle, let her come closer, let the distance between us close on her terms, not mine. When I finally turned, she was already there, her expression tighter, her eyes searching my face as if trying to recover something that had slipped away. "You cannot just walk out like this," she said, her words coming faster now, less controlled, more direct. "We were supposed to finish this today. Supposed to." I let that phrase hang in the air between us, then lowered my gaze briefly to the document in my hand before looking back at her. "That was your plan," I said quietly. Not accusing, not emotional, just accurate. She exhaled sharply, her composure shifting again, this time unable to fully return to the calm she had worn so carefully before. "This is not just about me," she said, her tone pressing harder now. "There are responsibilities, there are things that need to be handled, and you are making it complicated for no reason." I watched her as she spoke, not focusing on the words themselves, but on the spaces between them, the places where intention shows through. Responsibilities. Things. Complicated. None of it was specific. None of it needed to be. It was designed to move me, not inform me. "Then they can wait," I replied, my voice as steady as it had been in the office, unchanged by the shift in her tone. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if trying to decide whether I was serious, whether this was temporary, whether there was still a way to guide me back. I could see the question forming behind her eyes, the calculation continuing, adjusting, searching for an opening that was no longer there. "You are not thinking clearly," she said finally, softer again, but now the softness felt forced, placed over something sharper that she could no longer fully hide. "You have been through a lot. This is exactly why I am trying to step in." I nodded once, slowly, acknowledging the structure of what she was saying without accepting the meaning behind it. "You are stepping in," I said, repeating her words carefully, then letting a brief pause settle before I added, "But you are not stepping in for me." The distinction landed quietly, but it stayed there, impossible to move around. Her expression changed again, just for a second, something flickering there that she did not manage to control in time. Not anger, not guilt, something closer to recognition. I shifted the document slightly in my hand, not tightening my grip, just adjusting it, as if reminding myself that it was still mine to decide, still mine to hold. "I will have this reviewed," I continued, my tone calm, leaving no space for argument. "And I will decide what happens next." She opened her mouth as if to respond, then stopped, the words catching somewhere between intention and realization. The version of this conversation she had expected was gone. In its place was something she had not prepared for. I held her gaze for one more moment, not searching, not softening, just steady, then turned and continued down the hallway, my steps even, unhurried. This time, she did not follow immediately. And for the first time since this had begun, the silence behind me did not feel like pressure. It felt like space. The evening light stretched across the living room floor in long, quiet lines by the time I returned home, the house holding that familiar stillness that had once felt empty but now felt different, as if it were waiting rather than lacking. I placed the folded document on the kitchen table and did not sit down right away. Instead, I stood there for a moment, looking at it without touching it, letting the events of the day settle into something clearer, something that no longer needed to be questioned. The silence around me was not heavy. It was honest. I pulled out the chair slowly and sat, my movements unhurried, then reached for the document again and unfolded it carefully, smoothing the pages against the wood. This time, I read it not as someone being asked to agree, but as someone deciding whether it deserved agreement at all. The words did not change, but the way I saw them had. They no longer felt confusing or overwhelming. They felt precise, intentional, final, and because of that, they were easy to understand. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found a name I had not called in years. Mr. Harris, my husband's attorney, the man who had once sat at this same table, explaining things slowly, making sure I understood every line. Before I ever signed anything, I hesitated for only a second, not out of doubt, but out of recognition of what this call meant. Then I pressed it. He answered on the third ring, his voice older, but steady, familiar in a way that immediately grounded me. "Mrs. Collins," he said, a note of surprise in his tone. "It has been a long time." "It has," I replied, my voice calm, even, as if this conversation had always been waiting to happen. "I need you to look at something for me." There was no hesitation on his end. No questions about why now, no attempt to rush me through an explanation. Just a simple agreement, a time set for the next morning, and a quiet reassurance that I had done the right thing by not signing. When the call ended, I set the phone down beside the document and leaned back slightly in my chair, letting a slow breath settle through me. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel uncertain. I did not feel pulled in different directions by what others expected or assumed I would do. I felt aligned, clear. The house around me seemed to reflect that, the quiet no longer echoing, but holding. Later that night, as I turned off the lights and prepared to go upstairs, my phone buzzed once on the counter. A message from Emily. I did not open it right away. I did not need to. Whatever she had written would still be there in the morning, unchanged, waiting just like everything else. I turned the screen face down and walked away, my steps steady, my mind already moving forward rather than circling back. At the top of the stairs, I paused briefly and looked down into the dim living room, the outlines of familiar furniture resting exactly where they had always been, unchanged by anything that had happened that day. That was when it settled fully, not as a realization, but as something simpler. Family is not proven by who asks you to give things up. It is revealed by who respects what you choose to keep. And as I turned toward my bedroom and closed the door behind me, I understood that whatever came next would not be decided in someone else's office, under someone else's timing, guided by someone else's expectations. It would be decided here, quietly, clearly by me.